What's up, guys? Thank you for tuning in to an episode of the hashtag Black Professionals Project. Our mission here, once again, if you aren't familiar, is to educate and inspire Black and Brown youth, showing them careers that they can do via the faces of Black and Brown professionals. As you know, oftentimes Black and Brown youth don't see themselves represented in the professional world. And so we're here to try to give them that opportunity to see and hear some of the stories and some of the professional journeys of different careers that they can then follow in those footsteps and pursue. Today we have Kyeland Jackson, journalist extraordinaire. Hey Kyeland, how you doing? Thank you for joining us.
I'm doing well. I'm really excited for this project. Like you mentioned, we don't really see a lot of faces that look like us in a lot of different industries. So this kind of work to help more people that look, sound, and talk like us is an effort that's really, it's taken too long to get to this point to have that kind of effort around. So I'm excited.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you again. We really appreciate it. So if you want, just tell everybody, how old you are. You don't have to say a direct age, but within like what age group do you fall into, 15 to 18, 24 to 27, where are you sitting at here?
Sure. Yeah, I'm a 27-year-old. It's 27.
All right, so 27 years of age. So you've been on this earth long enough to pay taxes. So I think that will validate you as a professional.
Professional. Yeah, I don't feel very professional, but I've definitely paid more taxes than I'd like to remember.
That's okay. So the first thing that I want to get into here is, can you tell me, what is your ethnicity? How would you describe your ethnicity? And then tell me a little bit about your hometown and where you currently live.
Sure. Ethnicity, I would identify myself as a Black man. My mother and father are Black, African American. I'm from Elizabethtown, Kentucky. Not many people have heard of it, but it's about an hour south of Louisville, Kentucky, and very close to Fort Knox, the Army base. So that's where I'm based out of, but it's basically just the place that I called home for the longest, being a military brat before then. And it's still my stomping grounds when I ever occasionally visit family around the area.
Okay, gotcha. And then where are you currently working at?
I'm currently working in St. Paul, Minnesota, which is about 10 minutes from Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Okay, so the Twin Cities area. Nice.
Yes.
That's awesome. So give us a little bit about your education, sort of your major, and what got you prepared to do what you are today, which is be a journalist.
Yeah, I actually started out not thinking I wanted to be a journalist. I went into college wanting to do computer programming. I was thinking that I wanted to make the next Halo game or something like that. I was a big gamer going through high school, and it just didn't work out. So a couple years into college, I switched majors, tried to figure out where I was going and what direction to take, essentially. And a piece of advice I'd heard around that time was to find your strengths and really play to them. And so when I started thinking more on that, I started thinking more about my strengths of doing kind of broadcast work or broadcast impressions, of using my voice, using my own communication skills. And so from there, I went into communication and took an online journalism class. And as I started doing work for that class, and I eventually did work at the student newspaper, I just started to grow more and more of a love and interest into journalism and reporting, especially because it used my strengths. So I was able to apply those very quickly and very effectively. So yeah, that was kind of my start. Was a bit halfway through college was when I transferred to that communication discipline and really started to pursue that with a very journalistic centric perspective in mind, or focus in mind.
Sweet. So can you tell everybody what exactly is a journalist in your eyes? Because journalism in itself seems kind of like an umbrella term. There's a lot of different journalists who do a lot of different things. So how would you describe what a journalist is, and what roles are you specifically acting in that make you a journalist?
Yeah, I'd say that a journalist essentially is someone who tells a story. And then the different type of journalists differ by the medium. So you have photojournalists who do all of their work with photography and with the different kind of things that are happening, but shown through that through that photography lens. Then you have video journalists who are like broadcasters, news anchors, and written journalists or audio journalists. So there's a bunch of different mediums for storytelling, and it's mostly just telling the stories, though, of people, events, places, things, reunions or anniversaries of different events to the public in a kind of public service kind of fashion, or with a public service focus. So the whole intent of journalism is usually just to make more people aware of incidents or events or things that they should know about or things that might be important, in order to ultimately build a much more knowledgeable and much more kept up-to-date population. But that's like the very broad view of just journalism's mission, but that might differ depending on what kind of medium you're doing or what kind of outlet you're working for.
Gotcha. So you are specifically a news journalist. I know there's lots of different journalists, like sports journalists, financial journalists, political journalists. What would you say is your specific focus in journalism? Is it just general news, or what's your specified area?
Yeah, mine is news, and then to be more specific with where I'm working now, I'm a data reporter in Twin Cities PBS, which is a local TV station. So I do some TV and video journalism and some digital written journalism. And my focus is specifically on racial disparities in Minnesota and in the Twin Cities area. So my focus is still that news reporting, but news reporting with a bit of a more focused, contextual perspective, in terms of I'm looking at the historical and present factors that make maybe black and white differences in Minnesota so big, or that make differences between the Hmong population in Minnesota and the Native American population in Minnesota different. They are different. It's that very nuanced perspective of news that I would mostly be doing here, but roles change over time depending on where you're going and what kind of work you're doing.
Okay, gotcha. So I know you mentioned early on that you wanted to start in computer programming in school, and then you kind of caught the journalism bug as you went along. So what would you say makes you so excited about journalism? Like, what are some of the benefits to this career? What are some of the things that really just, turn the page for you to say, like, you know what, this is exactly what I want to do?
Yeah. Some of the small things about it is that it's something new almost every day, depending on what kind of work you do. That it's a new sporting event or a new local city event that you're covering, or some kind of new thing that you're going out and rediscovering. Another cool aspect of it is just you talk to a lot of people as the nature of the job. So it's a lot of human-to-human interaction of really learning people and giving a bit of your own feelings and I guess just interactions with other people through that interview in the first place. But I think what really got me to fall in love with it is just the aspect of affecting change with it. And that started a lot from, in a brief story, there was an investigative story done by the Associated Press that was about Chinese fishermen in South China, I believe. And I've told this story about 1,000 times, but still always get that a bit wrong. But this Associated Press story revealed that there was these fishermen that were being abducted from their families and being made to do essentially modern day slavery on some of these boats that kept them away from their families for years at a time in unhealthy conditions. And the story, once it was publicized, got enough attention and movement that they eventually found these fishermen and freed them, returned them to their families. And so whenever I read that story and saw the kind of effect that journalism could have, especially investigative journalism, which is what I would like to work my way into, that's what really motivated me to say, not only is this a field that I have some strengths into and that I've liked so far, but it's also one that can serve a mission to help people and to better communities, even if it's small communities that maybe not a lot of people have heard of. And so since then, I've been just totally committed to trying to pursue this field as far as I can.
Awesome. That's a really crazy story. I haven't heard of that before, so I have to look into that. If you could send me like a link to that story, I'd really appreciate it so I could read a little bit more.
For sure. It was even, it was a while back now. It was in 2017 or like late 2016 when they first wrote the story. And then after some follow-up reviews and follow-up just recognition, it got enough movement going to where they were able to free the fishermen, have a follow-up story, have interviews with them and their families. But yes, I'll definitely send that your way.
Thank you. Yeah, is that your co-host in the background? Your cat?
Trying to be a co-host, it seems.
Hey, I guess the journalism thing is in the family, they would say.
Mm-hmm.
So
we're trying to be nosy, yes.
So with that, now you're at this point where you want to be a journalist. Like this is what your mind is set on, and your goals are set towards. So what are kind of the first steps that you took to get to where you are today? Because I know for a lot of kids, they have a lot of goals. Even young adults, they have a lot of goals of where they want to go, but they just don't know the right places to go or the right moves to make to get to that point. So how did you get started?
There's a lot of careers that you can do a lot of groundwork and kind of research and then jump into it and be better off. But journalism isn't one of those. It's one of those careers that you really have to just start in order to learn as you go along. It's a very in-person experiential kind of career. So for me, I started just by doing some of the work in that class. It was an online journalism class where we created our own blog and did essentially news updates of the things that we were very much into, which at the time I was just doing some updates about video games and the industry at the time. Mm-hmm. And as I started working for the student newspaper, that's when the work was more broad. It was more looking at news that affected all the students on campus, but it still had that news focus. And so I started to move into that direction. So there's a lot of practical work I did through the student newspaper that eventually built up my skills here to the point that I started to research more and started to develop those skills more so. So that's a very roundabout way of just saying you have to do it in person, and you really have to just start by maybe volunteering at your student newspaper or starting your own blog or doing some kind of reporting, and hopefully have an editor or somebody there to help guide you along the way.
Okay, so, trying to get started on something like that, whether it be a school project or you're doing it independently, like starting your own blog, are there any platforms that you would suggest that kids get started on? Because I know back in our day, because we're kind of similar in age, there was Tumblr, but Tumblr is not as popular as it used to be. I know now more so people are using Medium and platforms like that. So do you have a platform that you would suggest people get started on?
Well, the crazy thing about just social media and journalism is that you have to kind of meet people where they are. And so you can do journalism on essentially any platform if you can find a way to make it work for you. So WordPress, of course, is still one I would suggest for just written blog style journalism. That's WordPress.com is a free site, I believe, where they let you put your own blog and have kind of your own page to design. And so that's a bit more of what you would see from a traditional newspaper when they have an online version. And it's very much still close in style to that if you use WordPress. But you can do this kind of journalism work on Instagram. You can make an Instagram story and make that journalism centric. Or Snapchat. There's Snapchat stories that CNN posts out or that the New York Times posts. You can really turn whatever you're using with into a journalism medium just by being there and reporting to say, like, I'm here on Facebook Live and there's a protest going on right now here at 30th and Muhammad Ali or something. You can just turn that medium into your own reporting machine, depending on what you have available and what audience you have on that platform. Gotcha. So especially social media is a good way to do that because so many people are on Instagram, Facebook, and are much more likely to share and look at your stories than perhaps like a WordPress article that you're just starting.
Okay, great. I think those are great suggestions. One question that I would have for that is, I know there's a lot of social journalists, right? Like everybody's reporting on everything nowadays. So what separates a professional journalist from a social journalist? You know, people who are just live tweeting events. What separates the two people? Or are they not different at all? Or at their core, are they the same thing?
I think it comes to the level of involvement. And so, whereas I would see a social journalist as being someone who is at the couch reporting of a meeting that's happening, I would say that differs from a live journalist who's there at the scene reporting in person. So really, if you want to marry yourself to the journalism field or to that kind of action, you have to be there or be as intimate with what you're trying to report on as possible. Because the whole point is you're putting your eyes on the wall. You're being the fly on the wall to be there to report on what's going on and to tell other people from the ground what's happening. Now, there are journalists who are doing that still in a different way now from afar. I mean, especially with coronavirus and working from home, there's a lot of journalists that have to report from home as a result of that. But those journalists are still very intimate with the subject because they have to call sources or they have to call the mayor or somebody who's doing that live meeting, or they're sending in questions that they're expecting answers for and bugging the PR people who are associated to get those answers. You have to be really dogged and very intimate with the subject. And if you do that, I feel like that's what makes the difference between a more hardcore journalist, or I guess a more in-person and reputable journalist, than a social journalist, perhaps, who might not have the time investment to put into this kind of work.
I see. So I would not be a professional journalist, guys. I would be a social journalist because I like to give my 2 cents every now and again, and then I would just jump out. But what he's saying here is, you know, you need to commit to the process, commit to the reporting, and that time commitment is really what will separate you out. Those are great points. I think that really will help people understand what it's going to require in their mental space so that they can move forward appropriately. So, you know, now that you've gotten started in your professional and your career, one thing that I always like to ask people is, what are 2 to 3 obstacles that you faced sort of in your professional journey thus far?
Mm-hmm. The first recurring one is always money. Journalism is not a very successful field, or I guess when you say successful, okay, I'll take that back. It's not a very high income field, and It's a very hard and stressful one. So it's one where you might work long hours or work late nights or work long meetings and still be required to write a report on it and then jump back onto a breaking news report the next day, but still be paid $35K a year or less. So it's not a very high income field, and therefore it's a hard one to get into and say, I'm going to devote all of my time to. In that sense, it's a very inequitable field because those that have the funds to be able to sustain themselves will oftentimes get by in the field, whereas someone who doesn't have enough money might need to do this and do a second job or a third job just to be able to make ends meet. But there are still opportunities there for, especially for people of color who look like me or look like you, to find a way in the field. There are grant opportunities and reporting initiatives that look for us that don't have the kind of income to be in that field and to get away and to do this kind of work for our communities, for the people that we see and interact with every day. So that's at least one obstacle that I faced. Another obstacle is just kind of public fear. A lot of times you're putting yourself kind of out there when you're going up to a big official and saying, what is the answer to this question? I need it now. And getting very uncomfortable to like ask very blunt questions up front of people and expect an answer. But that's a fear that like you have to get over by doing. The more you do it, the less uncomfortable you feel, the more you get accustomed to the situation. And then it's part of the mission to remember that you are essentially the voice amplifier for people in the community. And so if people want to know the answers to these questions that you're asking, a lot of times they deserve the right to have that answered, especially by public officials. So you have to think whenever you're asking these questions that I'm not just asking for myself, I'm asking for everyone else in this community who wants to know why you gave $50,000 to your wife or something like that, something along those lines. So yeah, that was another obstacle to get over. And I'd say probably the last obstacle, or one that comes to mind as well, is just the writing. It's just getting used to a lot of the writing sense of journalism. It's a lot different from the writing we're accustomed to making, especially in academics, where we're expected to make very long-winded, very vague papers to fill up word space and to fill up space for these reports that we send in, right? For journalism, it has to be very succinct, very brief, very informative, but has to move on to the next topic as you're going along. There's not a lot of space for a lot of that fluff. So that was an obstacle in terms of just learning some of the mannerisms of journalism and some of the writing styles and writing requirements for making good reports.
Oh, I see. So you're telling me the journalists on TV that I see every morning giving me the latest breaking news is not making $100,000 a year?
I mean, unless they're like a Lester Holt or something, no.
Man, so they look that good, but they don't have that much money.
Mm-hmm. And like you said, they have to look that good because that's a part of the job, especially for TV journalists too. But journalism is not a very high income field. It's very much one that you might do as a passion, but you have to know at the end of the day that you might get paid more as a communication specialist or something different. But it's still an industry for passion. If you're into it, you're very much married to it regardless of the outcome. But that's an idealistic view of it.
As I would hope to get from somebody in the field. But great. So 2 more questions here just before we wrap up. One question I like to ask people as well, in addition to the obstacles, is, what is like the day in your life like? How does your day-to-day workflow exist? Are you just waking up before the chickens and you're out, on the streets sniffing around for whatever's hot, or do you have somebody like feeding you that information, or what's going on?
Yeah, for me, it's different than like a breaking news reporter or something like that might be. So for me, I have more time with my stories to where a normal day would consist of me planning out a story angle with my editor to say like what kind of story seems present, what seems like there's a lot of angles to it to approach, what seems like there's people that are affected and available to talk about this that we can speak with. And then after we get that kind of wish list of things we would like in a story, then my work for that day, that rest of that week, is just putting all of those pieces together. So working with the people's schedules to say, can I come and interview you at this point in time? Or can I come to this service project that you're doing so that I can meet some people that are being affected by this? And whenever I go to those interviews, I'm also tasked to get pictures of the people or get pictures of different events or different spaces that kind of goes with the story. And after getting all of those raw materials together, by the end of the week for me, I just have to write the story, put it together, sometimes transcribe the interviews that I've made, so take them from audio format to something printed out so that I can work with it, and then give that to editors who will then kind of start a back and forth process of just getting rid of any grammatical mistakes, making sure every fact is correct and everything, because we want all the facts for the story to be correct, and then having that ready to publish, hopefully by the end of the week or the following day, depending on what kind of story is happening.
Okay, so that sounds like a pretty full day still. Like, even though you're not, out on the streets hunting down beats every now and again, which I'm sure you still are active, in the streets as well. But, it's a little different than, I guess, what the normal everyday citizen would consider, what a journalist is doing. I guess in my mindset, I'm always thinking like you're either in front of the TV, talking about what's going on at the hour, or you're out in the streets, with hurricanes in the background, like, I'm here on channel 2 and I'm trying to stay alive. Somebody save me. Like, something of that
it's raining
sort.
Sideways
But yeah, I think that shines a light on what the day-to-day career is for people who want to go into something like journalism, and show them that it's more than just, those two options. Those are things that people do, but there's another side to it as well. And I think that side will help.
And there's a bunch of different sides depending on what kind of stuff you're reporting on as well. So like for me at the student newspaper, I saw what it was like for the other journalists to have their own type of schedules as well. So like for the sports journalists, you might spend the earlier part of the week seeing what games are happening, which ones are not happening, which ones are planned, and then setting out a schedule for, I'm going to go to this game and cover this. I'm going to interview this coach before this, or this coach after, or talk with these players before or after, or look at the data for the batting average for this team before I have the story up. That's a preview of the game that's coming up. So Depending on what you're doing, the schedule will be potentially totally different. It might be you sitting outside of a weather forecast saying, this is happening here, or it could be the sports person going to a basketball game to say, I'm at this event now, covering it live, and we'll have in-depth analysis after. It really just depends on the role that you take.
Mm-hmm. So the last question I want to ask you here is, what are 2 to 3 pieces of advice you want to offer to the youth or, young Black and brown individuals in pursuing this career? What are 2 pieces of advice that would help them follow in your footsteps?
The first, and I think the biggest piece of advice I'd say, is networking. To network as much as you can, as crazily as you can. There are a lot of journalists out there, locally, nationally, statewide, that are essentially very much ready and willing to help other people up. But you just got to put your name out there and network with them. And a lot of the benefit I had from working with the student newspaper is that there was a lot of networking naturally with other journalists in the area. So the more that you put yourself around these kind of industry workers in the field, the more your name pops up and the more you can get referred to the kind of positions and kind of work that you're looking for. So I would do that through networking meetings, socials, even just going as far as to make a cold call or cold email to somebody to say, hey, I want to get into journalism. Can you help me out? Something like that will go much further than you might think it will. So I'd say networking, and in general, to just do it. It's a very scary idea to jump into writing as if you have authority on something, especially on a public space, to say like, this is what's happening according to this person. It's still according to that person, but you're very much being a definitive source for people to turn to. But you won't get very confident in it and very good at ensuring that it is qualified information until you start doing it. And the more that you start doing it, the better that you start getting at it. So it's one of those that you really just have to jump into the pool, whether it's hot or cold, and just sink or swim essentially with journalism and with writing or video or photography or whichever angle that you take it in. But the more that you do it, the more you'll really start to figure out how to swim and how to do a lot of these skills, and the better that you'll get at it. And with that networking component too, you'll have the skills and you'll have the resources of other people that know you to really spread the word about you and get you where you need to be. And I would say a third piece of advice too is just to look out for any scholarship opportunities, networking opportunities, grant opportunities, to try and get your name out there, and to try and get to a lot of these training opportunities and things that might be available. You can never have too little training, and it really is still an opportunity to network with more people and to build up on the craft.
That's wonderful. Well, there it is. Thank you, Mr. Jackson, for joining us today on the #Black Professionals Project. We appreciate you, and we know that a lot of the youth are going to really benefit from hearing your story, and now they'll have somewhere to start. You know, if they want to pursue this career, at least they can look to this video and see, you know, this is a guy that looks like me. And if he can make it happen, and you know, he's giving me this inside scoop, this is valuable information for free that I can ultimately use to get to where I want to be. So, you know, we appreciate it. We appreciate you, and we thank you, and we look forward to hearing your successes in the future.
No, thanks. I appreciate y'all. I'm really more excited to hear about the upcoming successes a lot of youth will get from this kind of information, because it's very possible, it's very doable. You can all make a career out of any of the things that will be suggested through this show, but you just have to really get out there and do it and believe that you can do it. That's half the battle, really.
Well, you heard it right here, folks. Network, and most importantly, just do it. Don't be afraid. Get out there and get it done. Chase that dream and make your reality what you want it to be. So thank you all again. We will see you next time on the #Black Professionals Project. And hopefully we'll see you as one of the Black professionals in the future. So thank you again, and have a good one.